Alejandro Herrera was desperate. Spain's richest pharmaceutical magnate had everything money could buy, except one thing. Someone who could control his 8-year-old twins, Miguel and Lucas. In 2 years, she had fired 17 nannies. The last 3 had resigned within a week, one even after only 2 hours. The children had become uncontrollable after their mother's death, turning the luxury mansion in Madrid into a daily battlefield. When Carmen Morales, a 25-year-old with no experience but a genuine smile, arrived, Alejandro thought she would last a day at most. I never imagined that girl would do something no one else had tried. Instead of trying to control the children, he would transform their pain into joy, their anger into laughter, and, most of all, he would teach a broken father how to regain his love for his own children. What happened in the following days? It changed the life of a millionaire family forever, but it was destroyed. Alejandro Herrera massaged his hands as he looked out the window of his office on the 31st floor of the skyscraper that housed the Herrera Pharma headquarters. By the age of 40, he had built a pharmaceutical empire that earned more than $200 million a year, but he couldn't manage 2 8-year-old children. Her desk was covered with resumes of nannies, housekeepers, and teachers who had resigned one after another. The last one, Mrs. Martinez, a 60-year-old woman with 30 years of experience, had shown up at her office at 7 a.m. with tears in her eyes. She had worked for aristocratic families throughout Spain, but the Herrera twins had defeated her in less than 48 hours. The problems had begun 2 years earlier, when Isabel, his wife and mother of the children, died in a tragic traffic accident. Alejandro was left alone with Miguel and Lucas, 2 children who until then had been happy and well-behaved. The loss of their mother transformed them into little destroyers who seemed to have declared war on the entire world. His pranks were not mere whims. They were acts of pure rebellion. They painted the walls with colors, hid the babysitters' phones in impossible places, put salt in the coffee, and released the goldfish into the pool. Once, they even called the fire department saying the house was on fire just to see what would happen. Alejandro had tried everything: child psychologists, educators, and even a life coach specializing in traumatized children. Nothing seemed to work. The twins continued to reject anyone who tried to enter their lives, as if they had built an insurmountable wall around their pain. Alexander's mansion in Salamanca had become a battlefield. The children's rooms looked like war zones. The kitchen was constantly in turmoil. The perfectly manicured garden was regularly devastated by their explorations. The domestic staff had begun to quit, tired of having to clean up ever-new messes every day. Alejandro felt like a failure as a father. He spent more and more hours at the office, not because he was overworked, but because he didn't know how to behave with his own children. When he came home at night, he always found a new, exhausted babysitter telling him about yet another hellish day. That morning, after the umpteenth resignation, Alejandro was sitting in his office when his secretary, Mrs. Garcia, knocked on the door. She was a 50-year-old woman who had worked with him for 10 years and knew him better than anyone. The woman walked in with a determined expression that Alejandro had never seen before. He explained that he had a different proposal. Her niece Carmen, 25, a psychology graduate but with no experience as a babysitter, had heard about the situation and wanted to try to help. Alejandro looked at her skeptically. All the experts had failed. How could an inexperienced girl do it? But desperation led him to accept. I had nothing more to lose. Mrs. Garcia made a call, and that afternoon Carmen Morales showed up at the mansion. Alejandro saw her from the window as she rang the bell. A tall, dark-haired girl with a bright smile and simple but well-kept clothing. He didn't seem like the kind of person who could intimidate 2 difficult kids, and this worried him even more. But Carmen had something that all the other nannies didn't have. I wasn't there for the money or the career. I was there because I truly believed I could help a broken family regain happiness, and I had a plan no one else had thought to try. When Alejandro met her in the entrance hall, Carmen asked him for one thing: to introduce Miguel and Lucas not as problem children, but as 2 little people who were suffering and needed to be understood. At that moment, Alejandro understood that perhaps for the first time in 2 years someone was seeing his children for who they really were. Not little monsters, but two children who had lost the most important person in their lives and didn't know how to express their pain, except through rebellion. Carmen entered the Herrera mansion with her heart beating fast, but not from fear. I had studied child psychology and knew that behind every destructive behavior of a child there is always an unexpressed need. Alejandro escorted her through hallways lined with expensive paintings and period furniture to the main hall where she was to meet the twins. The scene that unfolded before his eyes would have discouraged anyone. Miguel and Lucas sat on a €5,000 white leather sofa, impeccably dressed, but with defiant expressions on their faces. They had prepared what Carmen immediately recognized as a test. On the table in front of them was a glass of water precariously balanced, a few toys strategically scattered to trip her up, and their gazes fixed on her to study her every reaction. Instead of ignoring the cheating or scolding them, as all the other babysitters had done, Carmen did something completely unexpected. He walked over to the table, picked up the glass of water, drank it in one gulp, then sat down on the floor among the toys and said with the most genuine smile in the world, "So, which of you two is better at building forts?" Miguel and Lucas were bewildered. They had staged that scene to make the umpteenth Nanny flee, but she had transformed her provocation into an invitation to play. For the first time in 2 years, the twins didn't know how to react. Alejandro watched the scene from the door in disbelief. Carmen had defused in 30 seconds what usually became the first of an endless series of confrontations. Carmen began playing with the children without asking questions about their mother, without trying to impose rules, without introducing herself as their new babysitter. He simply behaved like a person interested in meeting them. Together they built a fortress out of the sofa cushions, transforming the elegant living room into a fantasy world. During the game, Carmen watched the twins closely. Miguel was more introverted, tended to control every detail of the construction, and got angry when something didn't go according to his plans. Lucas was more outgoing but also more aggressive. He constantly sought attention and reacted badly when he didn't get it immediately. Both showed clear signs of poorly prepared grief, repressed anger, need for control, fear of abandonment. But Carmen also saw something else. They were intelligent, creative children, desperately in need of affection, but terrified of becoming attached to someone who might then disappear from their lives, as had happened with Mom. After an hour of play, Carmen suggested something that none of the previous babysitters had ever done. He asked the children to show him the house from their point of view. Miguel and Lucas looked at her perplexed. They then began to accompany her on a journey that revealed much more about her moods than any session with a psychologist. They showed him their room, which they kept messy so no one could come in and touch our things. They showed him Mom's room, which Dad kept locked, but they knew a secret way in. They pointed out all the places in the house where they had gotten into the greatest mischief, recounting each episode as if they were glorious battles won against invading enemies. Carmen listened to everything without judging, nodding and asking questions that demonstrated genuine interest. The children began to relax, and for the first time in months, they started behaving like the 8-year-olds they were, curious, lively, but also sweet and vulnerable. At the end of the afternoon, when Alejandro returned from work expecting to find the umpteenth nanny on the run, he instead found Carmen sitting in the kitchen with the twins, who were telling him about when Mom used to make animal-shaped cookies. For the first time in 2 years, the house didn't look like a battlefield. There was an atmosphere of peace that Alexander had forgotten could exist. And her children were talking about Mom without crying, without screaming, without destroying anything. Carmen stood up when she saw Alejandro and whispered something to him that completely changed her perspective. "Your children aren't difficult. They're just sad, and sadness, unlike evil, can be cured with love and patience." That night, Alejandro watched the twins fall asleep peacefully for the first time in months, and realized that he might have finally found someone who could help his family heal. The following days revealed Carmen's true genius. Instead of imposing rules and punishments, he transformed every conflict into an opportunity for growth. When the twins deliberately knocked over their breakfast to taste it, Carmen grabbed a rag and turned the moment into a cleaning competition where the winner would choose the lunch menu. Carmen understood that children needed to feel useful. He appointed them assistant chefs in the kitchen and home security inspectors, making them feel like an active part of the family rather than an enemy to be controlled. The most significant change occurred when Carmen decided to confront her grief through shared storytelling. One night in the garden told the story of two princes whose kingdom had changed when the queen had to leave on a very long journey. The princes misbehaved because they were angry, but the more damage they did, the sadder they felt inside. Miguel and Lucas recognized each other in history. For the first time in 2 years, they began to talk openly about Mom. How much they missed his bedtime stories, his funny little voices, and how angry they were that he had left without saying goodbye. Carmen suggested creating a memory book for Mom. Instead of avoiding the topic, he encouraged them to celebrate the good times. They collected photos, drew memories, wrote letters telling him about their days. The children began to see Mom's memory as a precious treasure, not something painful. Alejandro watched these changes with amazement. Her children were returning to being the sweet children they were before the tragedy. But most of all, watching Carmen interact naturally with them, I was learning again how to be a present father. One night, as he put the twins to bed, Alejandro realized that for the first time in 2 years he wanted to go home from work. Carmen had not only healed Miguel and Lucas, she had healed an entire family. A month after Carmen's arrival, the transformation of the Herrera family was complete. The mansion, which had been the scene of daily battles, now echoed with laughter and games. Miguel and Lucas, who had terrorized nannies and housekeepers for 2 years, had grown into cooperative and affectionate children. Alejandro began to notice changes that went beyond simple behavior. The twins slept better at night, had fewer nightmares, and, most importantly, had regained interest in school activities. Their grades improved dramatically, and teachers reported that they had returned to being engaged and sociable students. Carmen had introduced a routine that gave the children security without being oppressive. Every day had its rituals. Breakfast was shared, sharing the night's dreams. Creative activities took place in the afternoon, followed by a walk in the park before dinner, and a bedtime story, which often became a moment of deep sharing. Carmen's true masterpiece was involving Alejandro in the healing process. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. He taught him that being a single dad didn't mean being perfect, just being present. He showed her how to transform everyday activities into moments of connection, cooking together on Sunday mornings, helping with chores not as an obligation, but as a game, sharing their work days so that the children felt part of their lives. Alexander discovered that he had lost not only a wife, but also his self-confidence as a father. Carmen returned that trust, showing him that his children needed him exactly as he was. Imperfect, sometimes confused, but full of love for them. One day, Alejandro returned home and found a scene that filled his heart with joy. Carmen was teaching the twins to dance in the living room with the music playing loudly. Miguel and Lucas were laughing and having fun, free and happy like I hadn't seen them in years. When they saw him at the door, they ran to hug him, dragging him into the impromptu dance. At that moment, Alejandro understood something fundamental. Not only had she found an exceptional nanny for her children, she had found someone who had brought life back into her home and joy back into her family. But there was something else that was quietly growing. Alejandro was falling in love with Carmen, not only for what she had done for his children, but for the extraordinary person she was. Kind, intelligent, full of an infectious vitality that had awakened emotions he thought he had buried with his wife. Carmen, for her part, couldn't deny that she felt something special for that family. She had taken the job thinking she would help 2 difficult children, but she had found herself loving not only Miguel and Lucas, but also their father. The decisive moment came during a party Carmen organized for the twins' 9th birthday. It was the first party since Mom died, and Alejandro was terrified it might be too painful. Instead, Carmen transformed the event into a celebration of life and family love. During the ceremony, when the twins blew out the candles together, they expressed a wish out loud. That Carmen would always be with us and that Dad would smile again like before. Alejandro was moved to tears. His children had not only healed, but they had also understood that he needed to heal and had identified in Carmen the person who could help both of them. That night, After all the guests had left and the children had gone to bed happy and tired, Alejandro and Carmen found themselves alone in the living room tidying up. They worked in silence, but both felt that the time had come to talk about what was happening between them. Alejandro was the first to break the silence, confessing that Carmen had done much more than save her children. He had saved his entire family, including him. Carmen replied that her life had also changed. She had never felt so fulfilled and happy as she had in the last few months with them. It was a truly sweet and intense moment. They both knew that what they felt went beyond a professional relationship, but they also knew they had to proceed with caution for the sake of Miguel and Lucas. That night, Alejandro fell asleep with a smile on his face. For the first time in 2 years, the future did not seem to him an unbearable burden, but a promise of happiness. The months that followed were the happiest Alexander had experienced since Isabel died. Carmen was no longer just her children's nanny. It had become the beating heart of a house that had regained its warmth. The Herrera family had discovered a new balance made of everyday laughter, shared projects, and, above all, a love that grew every day. Miguel and Lucas were completely transformed. At school, they had become the most popular kids in class, not because of Dad's money, but because of their contagious joy. They were back to playing sports, inviting friends over, and participating in school plays. Their grief over the loss of Mom hadn't disappeared, but they had learned to live with it in a healthy way, transforming it into precious memories, rather than destructive rage. Alejandro had recovered the joy of being a father. Each night he returned home with excitement, knowing that tales of everyday adventures, heartfelt hugs, and the warmth of a close-knit family awaited him. Carmen had taught him that he didn't have to be perfect to be a good father. I just had to be present and loving. But above all, Alejandro had recovered the capacity to love. What he felt for Carmen was different from the love he had had for Isabel. Not better or worse, just different. With Isabel, he had built a family as a young dreamer. With Carmen, he was rebuilding a family as a mature man, who had gone through pain and emerged stronger. Carmen had faced an equally profound transformation. The inexperienced girl who had arrived at the blacksmith's mansion had become a self-confident woman, aware of her own worth and in love with a family she considered her own. The decisive moment came one spring night, 6 months after their first meeting. Alejandro had organized a special dinner in the mansion's garden with lights hanging between the trees and the scent of the flowers Carmen had planted with the children. After dinner, while Carmen was unaware, Alejandro stood up and took a small velvet box out of his pocket. The twins began to clap with excitement and Carmen understood what was about to happen. Alejandro knelt before her, his eyes filled with tears of joy. He told her that she had saved his family and given him hope, that he couldn't imagine a future without her, and that he wanted her to officially become part of the Herrera family. Carmen said yes before he finished the question, and Miguel and Lucas burst into a chorus of cheers that woke up the entire neighborhood. But the most moving moment was yet to come. After Alejandro put the ring on Carmen's finger, the twins approached with their drawings. They had prepared 2 identical little letters written in their childlike handwriting, but full of sincere feeling. In their letter, Miguel and Lucas thanked Carmen for bringing happiness back to their home, for helping them not be afraid to love someone, and for making their dad laugh again. But above all, they asked her if she wanted to become their new mother, not to replace the real one, but to complete the family they had rebuilt together. Carmen cried with joy reading those words. Not only had she found the love of her life, but she had also gained 2 children who loved her with all the intensity children are capable of. The marriage took place 6 months later in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden. Miguel and Lucas played the role of pages, proud to have played a part in the most beautiful love story they had ever seen. That night, as the new Herrera family fell asleep under the same roof as husband, wife, and children, Alejandro reflected on how extraordinary the power of love was. 2 years earlier, he had lost everything. The wife, the serenity, the relationship with his children. Now he had recovered all of this and even more, thanks to a brave girl who had seen beyond the superficial problems and healed the deepest wounds. Carmen had done something that no expert had managed to do. He had transformed pain into love, anger into joy, despair into hope. But above all, He had shown that the most beautiful families are those that choose each other day after day, with patience, understanding, and infinite love. 2 years after their marriage, the Herrera family had become an example of how love can overcome any tragedy. Alejandro, Carmen, Miguel, and Lucas lived in a harmony that seemed natural, but was actually the fruit of hard work, patience, and mutual dedication. Carmen had legally adopted the twins, who now proudly bore the surname Herrera Morales. They had never forgotten their biological mother. They still kept her photo on their nightstand and wrote her little birthday cards, but they had learned that the heart is big enough to love more people at the same time. Miguel and Lucas, now 11 years old, had grown into responsible and loving boys. They had inherited their father's intelligence and Carmen's sensitivity, but above all, they had developed an extraordinary empathy toward other children going through difficult times. Alejandro had discovered that he was an even better father than he thought. With Carmen by his side, he had learned to balance work and family, to be present at important moments, and to pass on to his children not only financial security but also solid values. Carmen had realized her dream of helping children in need, but in a way she had never imagined. In addition to being a wonderful mother to Miguel and Lucas, she had opened a support center for families going through difficult bereavements or separations. The true proof of Carmen's miracle came when the twins turned 13. During the party, surrounded by friends and family, Miguel took the microphone to give a speech that moved everyone present. She thanked Dad for never stopping loving them, even when they were truly unbearable. He thanked Mama Isabel, who looked down from heaven, for having loved them in the first years of their lives, but above all he thanked Carmen, whom he defined as the angel who saved our family. She explained that Carmen had never tried to replace her mother, but had created a completely new place in their hearts. He had helped them not to be afraid of loving, to transform sadness into strength, to believe that after every storm, calm always comes. Lucas added that Carmen had taught him the most important thing, that a family isn't just made up of the people born together, but above all, those who choose to stay together during difficult times. That night, when all the guests had left, the Herrera family met again in the garden where Carmen had first knocked on their door. Alejandro watched his wife play with the children and thought about how incredible the power of true love was. Carmen had done something that went beyond being a good nanny or a good wife. He had taken a family torn apart by grief and transformed it into something stronger and more beautiful than before. He had shown that miracles exist, but they require brave hearts willing to believe in love, even when all seems lost. Miguel and Lucas were no longer the angry, destructive children who terrorized their babysitters. They had grown into considerate teenagers who helped their classmates in need and thanked Carmen and Alejandro every night for giving them such a special family. Alejandro was no longer the desperate, lonely man who didn't know how to handle his children's pain. He had become a present and loving father, a devoted husband, and, above all, a man who had learned that happiness is not a permanent state, but a daily choice. And Carmen had discovered that sometimes fate takes us exactly where we were meant to be. He had gone to the blacksmith's mansion thinking of helping two difficult children, and had ended up building the most beautiful family he could have dreamed of. That night, as she put her boys to bed, because they were now her boys in every sense, Carmen thought about how powerful love is when it's guided by wisdom, patience, and the faith that every person, even the most wounded, can shine again. The Herrera family had shown that it doesn't matter how deep the wounds are or how dark the future seems. With the right person by their side and love as their guide, every family can be reborn stronger than before. Because true love is not that which knows no obstacles, but that which transforms obstacles into bridges to happiness. Like if you believe in the healing power of family love. Comment on which moment in the story moved you the most. Share to inspire families going through difficult times. Subscribe for more stories of love, family, and second chances. Sometimes it takes a special person to show a family how to heal together. Sometimes the strongest love is born from the ashes of the deepest pain, and sometimes miracles take the form of those who choose to love unconditionally. Because every family can be reborn when it finds someone willing to believe in its happiness. Yeah. See?